And today, one reason that the church is in the condition that it's in is because there is so many voices. So many other voices to attract the church from the voice of God, till it's very doubtful that many would hear the voice of God, though it spoke right in their midst. They perhaps wouldn't even understand it, because it would be a foreign thing to them. They have got themselves so much centered on the voices of the day. And if we notice in our scripture reading that the voice of God was foreign to them. And it's become that way again today, that the voice of God, there is so many other voices. And then if God promised He would give us that, and if other voices are contrary to the voice of God, then it must be the voice of our enemy to confuse us, that we would not understand the voice of God when it spoke. And we noticed it was something similar to that with Eli and with Samuel, but Eli recognized right away that it was God, and it was absolutely a blaspheme on Eli, because the voice of God speaking to Samuel had told him about Eli's wrongdoings, for he had babied his sons, and they'd taken money and the flesh from the offerings that was not right, and they were doing things wrong, contrary to God's Word. And Samuel had, only thing that Samuel could do was speak exactly, and he was a little reluctant to do so, because it was against the very place that he was sent to be raised up in, Eli, and in the temple. But Eli said, "Speak on." And he told him exactly what was going to happen. That Samuel, or Eli's day, was finished as a priest, because God had spoke. And God was sending His message through Samuel the prophet. Very odd birth, dedicated to the Lord from a child. God spoke to him as a child and was preparing him for a work that laid ahead. And Eli's time was finishing up. There is so many voices in the earth today that it is absolutely a hard thing, because it deadens the voice of the supernatural. There is so many intellectual voices, great voices, a mighty man who are intellectual, that in their intellectual conditions even shake the nations. They're just not overnight people, but they shake nations, bringing great organizations together, great campaigns, largely, and a person would be a bit confused. It's enough to confuse them of how that these things go on and prosper. And there's voices that raise up and do these things, and it causes the voice of God to be placed way back somewhere. The true voice of God. And the voice of God, they say, how will we know it's the voice of God? Because for today, then, it was a vindicated prophet. Now, today, how we know it's the voice of God? Because it's the manifestation of the prophet's word. This is God's prophet. And the true voice of God only brings back that real, living, supernatural God with His supernatural Word, with the supernatural manifestation of the true Word. then we know that it's the voice of God. And there's so much other in the other realms that just almost deaden that out. But remember, it will glisten. It'll come forth. It'll do it. Now, there is a voice today in the world of politics. That's a great voice. And people, absolutely, in this great day of politics, it's all mixed up in their churches and everything. And many times that we have just seen recently that the voice of politics is actually stronger than the voice of God in the churches. Or the American people would have never did what they just done. They'd have never done it. If the voice of God would have been kept alive in the church, they'd have never made that mistake. But the voice of politics is so much stronger in the earth today than the voice of God, until people sold their Christian birthrights for a mess of popularity, education, and political power. It's such a shame to see it. The very thing that our nation was made what it's made on. The people turned right back around and voted in the thing that we left the other country and the Plymouth Rock and Mayflower and them come over here and establish this great economy that we have, is the very thing that we fought so hard to come out of. We put ourselves right back in its clutches. Because that the Bible speaks it would be that way. And the system of Eli, a priest instead of a prophet, the prophet is the Word, and the priest was the church, and it's got in such a place till it began to get so loose that the Word is foreign to the people. They don't get it. Then you can speak it and they don't understand it because they're not trained to it. Paul said, if the trumpet gives an uncertain sound, who will know to prepare himself for battle? The people are trained to a church voice, a church trumpet. We've got more in our Sunday school than the rest of them's got. That don't mean a thing. We've got more in our denomination than the rest of them's got. We're the biggest amongst the denominations. See, that's the kind of a voice that the people are trained for. In the street, they go out to get the people and bring them in. Tens of thousands, times thousands in great campaigns. Bring them in. What are they interested in? We got the biggest church, we got the biggest congregation, we got the highest membered Sunday school, we got the mayor of the city come to our church. That might be all good. But if that same church isn't trained to the voice of God, the gospel trumpet, what good does it do? And when a thing rises just like has rose amongst our government, what's happened? The church didn't know the voice of the trumpet. And they don't know what to do. The great promise of prosperity, an intellectual giant coming in, and they went right over the very thing that the Bible predicted and brought it in. See? A political voice. And it proved that it overrode the religious voice, or they'd never done what they did. The gospel voice. Because we're promised a lot of stuff. We're promised prosperity, and no doubt but what we'll get it. But still, that doesn't mean anything to a believer. Turn over in the book of Hebrews at the 11th chapter. Listen to that St. Paul speak, how they in the days wandered about in sheepskins and goat skins, was destitute. Not a place, couldn't enter the city. I was reading in the Nicaea Council, one of the great issues come up at Nicaea, Rome, 300 years after the death of Christ. And the great Nicaea Council, one of the great church that stood for what was right. They wanted the Bible. And the Roman converts of the first church of Rome had injected dogmas to say, for instance, like we have Christmas. Christmas, Christ is no more born on the 25th day of December than I was. Why, the hills of Judea are snowy. It contrasts all other Bible prophecies. He was born in the spring like all lambs are born. Why was He born in a barn instead of a house? He was a lamb. Why wasn't He not just run up to the altar, to this altar where He was nailed to, the cross? He was led to the cross. You lead the sheep to the slaughter. He was a lamb. Then He was born when lambs is born. But you see, to do that, they had the sun god's birthday, which on the solar system, the sun in the 5 days from December the 20th until December the 25th, there's hardly a moving at all of the sun. It varies a little each day, just longer, 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 till it hits its longest day in July. And then in December, its shortest day. And then that little time of the 25th, from the 20th to the 25th, they had the Roman circus and the celebration of the sun god's birthday. So then Jupiter, which is a Roman god, and then they injected it, and saying then we will take the Son of God and the sun god's birthday, put that together to be one great celebration. That's contrary. And all the many injections that they placed in there. And then when them true man of God who wanted to stay with the Word, like Polycarp, Irenaeus, Martin, those great early sainted men who wanted to stay with the truth. And when they brought through the Nicaea Council, some of those people had been so rejected until prophets came in out of the wilderness with nothing around it but a piece of sheepskin to set in that council. But they know the word of the Lord. But popularity, them 15 days of bloody politics, and overrode it. Then we had 1,000 years of dark age. But God promised that trumpet would sound again. Always the people listens to the true voice of the Word. Always examine what you do by the Word. The voice of politics. And we in America and the rest of the world have a loud speaking voice today, and that's the voice of Hollywood. It's captured the world. Let somebody come out in Hollywood with something, you find it all over the country. Now, we notice that they have set a pattern for our women on their dress, their hairstyles. They set that dress. The church ought to know the voice of the trumpet of God on that. But there's so much confusion because, you see, others do so. Examples. Don't ever pattern yourself after that kind of example because it's perishable. Always hear the voice of God, what He says about it. And then we notice at Hollywood they raise up things, and just let me speak just a moment on this before we go further. There was a thing come out not long ago that a man in Hollywood, nothing against the man now, he's a mortal that Christ died for, but just to show you, they invented a little thing called the kids use called the hula hoop or something. And if you ever noticed the vulgarity and things that follow that, what? In the little children. That's not right. Now, Hollywood is full of the gunfighters. Now, anyone that knows history knows that them people back there in them days that was gunfighters like the different fellows, they wasn't decent citizens. They were renegades. They were like Al Capone and Dillinger. They got a Hollywood play they called, on the television, they called Gunsmoke. I heard on the monitor the other day that the fellow that plays it, Arnez or something, or Arnez, or I forget what his name is, and he's supposed to he represents Matt Dillon, who was a sheriff in Kansas. And Matt Dillon was as yellow as a rabbit. He shot 28 men in the back, innocent people, going outside of Dodge City and waiting in a bush. And when a man come along, that somebody call him and tell him that there was a certain villain coming through, he'd stay out there, and when the man come in and shoot him through the back. Now we find his big guy that comes down. Why, it's absolutely glorifying sin. But the little children of our country can tell you more about Matt Dillon than they can tell you about Jesus Christ. The stores, the 10-cent stores, and the clothing department is hanging full of little toy guns with little hats that you could buy anywhere. It's all right to wear that, but I'm just telling you, see. Then the commercial world picks that thing up and makes millions of dollars off of it. We have what we call St. Patrick's Day. We have what we call these religious holidays. And the commercial world has picked it up. And they make millions of dollars. Mother's Day. Bunches of flowers. Why, every day should be an honorable day to Mother. She's off somewhere old, go see her. That'll be worth more than all the flour you could send her or anything else. See, but they pick it up. It's a voice, and we blend right in with it. It's really not right. But what are you going to do? See, I'm trying to get to a point here to tell you something. What I believe, the voice is rare. The voice of God. Now we find out if they set the pace. And did you ever notice our young boys has become Ricky and Elvis? You got a child named that, change it right quick. Call him number 1 or 2 or something. That's a horrible. You say, what difference does the name mean? Well, sure it means something. Your name characterizes your life. Now, Brother Branham, you're on numerology. No, I'm not. I'm on thus saith the Lord. Why was it when Jacob, he lived to his name as deceiver, supplanter, Jacob. And when God changed him, He changed his name. God changed Saul to Paul, Simon to Peter. Certainly to have something. And Ricky and Elvis and such names as that is the modern American name which throws a child automatically right into that. See what I mean? I hope I better back up and don't get too far on a limb here. See what I mean? She wouldn't understand. But all these things is not even understood by the common person. They don't catch it. because they got one trend. That's all they listen to. Those voices.